A world without noise, the ancient human sound world. For most of human history, the world was not loud. It did not surround people with continuous sound. It did not hum in the background. It did not repeat itself endlessly, day and night. There were no layers of sound stacked on top of one another, no distant rhythms continuing without pause, no persistent noise reminding humans of activity elsewhere. Silence was not rare, it was normal. For early humans, quiet was not something to seek or create. It was simply how the world existed. This documentary explores that ancient reality, a world shaped not by noise, but by the absence of it, and by what that absence allowed the human body and mind to become, the world before continuous sound. For over 99% of human existence, there was no such thing as background noise. There were sounds, yes, but there was no layer of sound that remained when activity stopped. No constant auditory field filling every moment. Sound appeared only when something acted upon the world. A foot stepped on a dry earth. A stone shifted beneath weight. An animal moved through grass. A voice was raised to communicate or warn. And when the action ended, the sound ended with it. Nothing continued without intention, nothing lingered without cause. This meant that most of the day and most of the night passed in quiet, not silence as emptiness, silence as stability, silence as the natural resting state of the environment, silence as the baseline condition. In the ancient world, silence was not interpreted as absence. It was interpreted as information. It meant that nothing was moving nearby, that nothing has changed, that the environment was stable. This understanding was not intellectual. It was physiological. The human nervous system evolved inside this logic. The brain learned over countless generations that quiet meant continuity, that the world was behaving as expected. Sound meant interruption. Sound meant that something new had entered the environment. This distinction shaped the entire sensory architecture of our species. How the human auditory system was shaped. The auditory system is unique among the senses. Unlike vision, it cannot be closed. Unlike touch, it cannot withdraw. Unlike smell, it cannot fade completely into the background. Early humans were always listening, but listening did not mean constant stimulation. It did not mean processing endless sound. It meant waiting. The auditory system evolved to remain in a low-energy monitoring state, alert for changes in a mostly quiet world. This is why sudden sounds feel urgent. Unexpected noise triggers reflexes. Silence feels natural when nothing is wrong. The brain was never designed to process continuous sound, because continuous sound did not exist. The prehistoric soundscape in detail. Anthropological reconstructions and acoustic studies of natural environments give us a clear picture of what ancient humans heard. In open landscapes, sound traveled far, but it did not persist. Ambient sound levels were extremely low. Most sounds were intermittent. Quiet intervals dominated experience. At night, the environment grew even quieter. Wind softened, animals settled, Human activity stopped almost entirely. There was no persistent rhythm, no repeating mechanical cycle, no distant hum, just long stretches of environmental stillness punctuated by occasional, meaningful signals. Why noise was rare and meaningful. In the ancient world, sound had consequences. Any noise risked revealing position, attracting predators, alerting rival groups. Because of this, sound was produced carefully. Voices were lowered. Movement was measured. Tools were used deliberately. Noise was not careless. It was costly. Sound was something you used, not something that surrounded you. Silence and survival. Silence played a direct role in survival. A quiet environment allowed early humans to detect subtle movement, to locate predators by sound alone, to sense distance and direction accurately. When sound appeared against silence, it stood out sharply. Nothing masked it. Nothing competed with it. Hearing became one of the most important survival senses, not because the world was loud, but because it was quiet. Nighttime, the quiet half of human life. Night in the ancient world was not filled with activity. After sunset, work ceased. Movement slowed. Groups gathered close. Fires were small and contained. Light was minimal. Sound was minimal. Nighttime soundscapes were sparse. Insects, occasional animal calls, wind, the soft crackle of fire. Between these were long periods of quiet. This quiet allowed the body to rest, not deeply, but honestly. Sleep in a silent world. Ancient sleep did not occur in silence because silence was desired. It occurred in silence because silence was normal. This changed how sleep functioned. Ancient humans slept lightly, responsively, but without constant interruption. They did not experience endless, meaningless sounds, triggering false alarms. When a sound occurred, it mattered. Because of this, the nervous system could relax between events. Sleep was vigilant, but not stressed. Vigilance without exhaustion. This distinction is critical. Ancient humans were vigilant. They were not chronically stressed. Vigilance meant the ability to respond when something changed. It was a temporary state, activated by sound or movement, and released when quiet returned. Stress is what happens when activation does not end. In a quiet world, vigilance had a clear off switch. When silence returned, the body understood that danger had passed. Heart rate slowed, breathing softened, muscles released. The nervous system was allowed to complete its response. This cycle, alertness followed by calm, repeated naturally throughout the day and night. Ancient humans lived in demanding environments, but their bodies were not trapped in constant readiness. Silence made recovery possible. Social silence among early humans. Ancient humans did not fill silence with speech. Silence was not a social failure, it was a shared condition. Groups could sit together without speaking, walk together without conversation, work side by side in silence. Speech was not required to signal belonging. Presence itself was enough. This created a different form of social bonding, one based on shared environment rather than constant verbal exchange. Why speech was limited. Speaking carried risk. A voice traveled farther than footsteps. It revealed location to animals and rival groups. It could not be recalled once released. Because of this, ancient humans learned to value restraint. Speech was used when it served a clear purpose: to warn, to coordinate, to teach, not to fill space. Silence reduced risk for the group. It increased collective safety. Quiet was not passive. It was strategic. Work, tools, and temporary noise. Ancient tools produced sound, but only briefly. Stone striking stone echoed sharply, then stopped. Wood being shaped created rhythm, then silence returned. Bones cracked once, not endlessly. Work did not create an ongoing soundscape. There was no machinery continuing without attention. No background process running after hands were still. This mattered for the nervous system. Sound had a beginning and an end. The body did not need to remain alert after the task was finished. Work concluded. Quiet followed. Recovery was built into daily life, the rhythm of ancient life. Ancient life followed a clear, repeating rhythm: action, sound, completion, silence. The brain learned that stimulation would end. The body learned that tension would release. There was no accumulation of unresolved activation. Each burst of sound was followed by space. This rhythm was not planned. It emerged naturally from the environment, and it protected the nervous system. Attention in a quiet environment. In silence, attention behaves differently. The brain does not need to filter overlapping signals. It does not need to decide what to ignore. Instead, attention narrows naturally. Small sounds stand out clearly. A distant movement becomes noticeable. A change in rhythm signals meaning. Direction and distance are easier to judge. Early humans developed highly refined auditory awareness, not because sound was constant, but because it was rare. Silence sharpened perception. Silence and memory formation. Memory is shaped by separation. In quiet environments, events stand apart from one another. A sound heard once is not lost among thousands of others. It occupies its own space in memory. Ancient humans formed strong episodic memories because sounds were distinct. Experiences were not layered. Nothing blurred together. A single sound could mark an entire moment. Memory did not compete with background noise. Time perception without noise. Without constant stimulation, time felt different. Moments were not compressed. Events did not rush into one another. There was space between experiences. Silence slowed perception. Days felt longer, not because more happened, but because each moment was fully experienced. Transitions were clear. Morning felt different from afternoon. Day felt different from night. Time had texture, emotional regulation in quiet conditions. Silence allowed emotions to complete their natural cycles. Fear rose when danger appeared. Fear fell when danger passed. There was nothing to keep the emotion partially activated. No lingering sound reminding the body to stay alert. This allowed emotional recovery. Ancient humans experienced intense emotions. But those emotions resolved. They did not remain suspended. Quiet gave the nervous system permission to settle. Silence as environmental trust. Over thousands of generations, humans learned to trust silence. Quiet meant safety, stability, continuity. The environment communicated clearly. When something changed, it announced itself through sound. When nothing changed, silence confirmed it. The world was dangerous, but it was understandable. The human brain still carries this expectation. The structure of the human brain reflects this ancient world. It expects quiet intervals, time to recover, rare meaningful sound. These expectations are not cultural. They are biological. They were shaped long before cities, before machines, before constant noise. Silence is not a preference, it is an ancestral requirement. The ancient world was not peaceful. It was clear. It is important not to romanticize the past. The prehistoric world was harsh. It demanded attention. Mistakes were costly, but it was not confusing. Sound meant something. Silence meant something else. There was no constant sensory fog. The environment spoke only when necessary. The long agreement between humans and silence. For tens of thousands of years, humans lived inside an agreement with their environment. The world remained quiet unless something changed. Humans listened carefully when it did. This agreement shaped sleep, attention, memory, emotional regulation, social behavior. It shaped what safety felt like. It shaped how the body rested. It shaped how the mind recovered. The beginning of change. Slowly, this world began to shift. Groups grew larger, settlements formed, human activity extended. Sound became more frequent, but silence still existed. True continuous noise had not yet arrived. When silence began to disappear, for most of human history, silence was not created. It was inherited. It existed naturally, without effort, without intention. But silence did not disappear all at once. It faded slowly, almost unnoticed, as human life changed in small, practical ways. This part of the story begins not with machines, but with people staying closer together for longer periods of time, in the same places. The first great change was not noise itself. It was permanence. Early humans began to stay in one place longer. Seasonal camps became repeated camps. Repeated camps became settlements. More people lived closer together for longer periods, day after day. This alone changed the sound world. More footsteps, more voices, more activity happening at the same time. Silence still existed, but it became shorter. The rise of shared sound. In mobile, hunter-gatherer life, sound moved with people. When people moved on, sound left with them. In early settlements, sound stayed. Work happened near sleeping areas. Animals were kept close. Children played nearby. Voices overlapped. Sound no longer belonged to a single action. It became shared. Animals and the first constant noise. Domesticated animals changed the soundscape dramatically. Unlike wild animals, domesticated animals stayed. They made noise at night. They moved unpredictably. They vocalized without danger. For the first time, humans slept near continuous living sound. This was not yet industrial noise, but it was persistent. Silence became less absolute. Work that did not end with sunset. As societies became more complex, work extended. Food processing, tool production, storage, repair. Some activities continued later into the evening. Sound followed. The clear boundary between day and night softened. The night grew less quiet. The body notices the change. The human nervous system adapted slowly. It did not resist sound outright, but it lost something subtle. The clear signal that silence once provided, that danger had passed, became less reliable. Quiet no longer meant nothing was happening. Something was always happening nearby. The body stayed slightly alert. Vigilance without resolution. In earlier times, vigilance ended when silence returned. Now, silence came and went. Noise appeared more often, and sometimes it meant nothing at all. This confused the ancient logic of the nervous system. The body prepared for danger, then found no danger, over and over. The response began to linger, the first fragmentation of sleep. Sleep was among the first systems affected, with more sound at night, animals shifting, people moving, fires crackling longer, voices carrying. Sleep became lighter, not more alert, but more interrupted. The body woke more often without reason. The ancient relationship between sound and threat weakened. Noise without meaning. This was the crucial shift. Sound began to lose meaning. Not all sound indicated danger. Not all sound required response. But the auditory system did not know this. It reacted anyway. The brain had no way to ignore sound safely, because ignoring sound had never been safe before. The slow loss of the off switch. Over generations, the nervous system adapted, but imperfectly. The clear off switch provided by silence weakened. Even during quiet moments, the body remained slightly prepared. Rest became less complete. Recovery took longer. The cost was small at first, almost invisible. The expansion of human activity. As societies grew, sound layered further. More people, more tools, more animals, more overlapping tasks. Sound was no longer episodic. It became environmental. Silence still existed, but it had to be found. The mind begins to filter. To cope, the brain began to filter sound. This was new. Instead of responding to every sound, the brain learned to suppress some of them. This allowed survival. But it came with trade-offs. Reduced sensitivity, delayed reaction, increased cognitive load. Listening became work. Attention divided. With more sound, attention fragmented. Multiple signals competed. The brain had to decide what matters, what doesn't, what to ignore. This decision-making consumed energy. Attention no longer rested naturally. It was managed. Memory in a noisier world. As sound layered, memory changed. Events blurred together. Moments no longer stood alone. The brain stored experiences with less clarity, not because humans became worse at remembering, but because experiences overlapped. Noise reduced separation. Time begins to compress. As stimulation increased, Time felt different. Days felt shorter. Transitions less distinct. Without silence between events, the mind moved faster, not because life sped up, but because nothing slowed it down. Emotional states without resolution. Noise interfered with emotional cycles. Fear rose. But silence did not always follow. The body stayed partially activated. Emotions lingered longer than necessary. Recovery became incomplete. The body adjusts, but pays a price. Humans adapted. They always do. But adaptation did not restore the ancient balance. It created a new baseline, a baseline of mild, constant activation. Not panic, not exhaustion, just less rest. Silence becomes rare enough to feel strange. Eventually, silence itself changed. It became noticeable, unusual, sometimes uncomfortable. Without constant sound, the mind turned inward. People heard their own breathing, their own heartbeat, their own thoughts. Silence stopped feeling neutral, the final break with the ancient world. By the time true continuous noise arrived, the ancient relationship was already broken. The nervous system no longer trusted silence fully. The world no longer went quiet long enough to reset the body. Noise was no longer an interruption. It was the environment. What was lost, what disappeared, was not peace. It was clarity, the clear signal that nothing was wrong, the reliable off switch for vigilance, the space between events. What remains in the human body? Despite everything, the body still remembers. It still responds to silence. Heart rate slows, breathing deepens, muscles release. Not because silence is modern comfort, but because it is ancestral. A world without noise still exists, briefly. In rare moments, the ancient world returns. At night, far from activity. In deep wilderness, in enclosed, quiet spaces, the body responds immediately, as if nothing was ever lost. This is not nostalgia. It is an observation. The human body evolved in silence. The modern world removed it. And the body continues to adapt, imperfectly. The question that remains: what happens to a species when the environment it evolved for no longer exists? Not suddenly, but slowly, quietly.